Welcome to the David Moskrop Show. I am David Moskrop. That's how you know you're in the right place. If you're
Do you
watching the
look at
Joe
notes for
Rogan
that?
show, this is if you're watching. I actually do have that written down
Welcome to the,
as a note,
what is it?
as a line. If you're here for the Joe Rogan show, this is the wrong show. This is the David Moskrop Show, and my guest today is not David Moskrop. It is Vass Bednar. I'm going to read her biography right now. So,
Mm,
quite a good one. Executive Director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy program, co-author of The Big Fix, How
right.
Companies Capture Markets and Harm Canadians, a book which I quite enjoyed
Thank you.
and reviewed,
Yeah.
and author of Regs to Riches, which I religiously read, and former host of the Globe and Mail Lately podcast. That's
Well, we
wrapped up?
just we just ended season 3, and I think its future is a question mark. So that's why I use the past tense there. But I'm really proud of the 32 episodes we did. Yeah.
That is a solid run, and we are
Right.
episode 4. So you're pioneering us with episode 4. We've
Love.
talked. We're flying. We're 4 in. However many more to go, hundreds more to go, and we're still figuring out the angles. But I'm glad that we have this chat early on because we
Mm,
chatted before about all kinds of things, and I was excited to talk to you about all of this, starting with something I'm hoping you can help me understand, which
let's
is
find out.
influencers, because I'm learning YouTube and TikTok, and I'm learning
Yeah.
video after years of just, typing. And now you get to see me, and I get to see you, and people get to talk about my face. It's really nice.
Do
And
people write to you about your face?
no, they don't.
Okay.
No, they don't. They
Yeah.
don't care about my face. Uh, at least they don't tell me, which is great. Please don't
Yeah.
tell me. I don't want to. I don't want to know. But I'm trying to understand influencer culture, but specifically how it affects public policy in this country, because apparently
Mm.
influencers can be, and the key is in the name, influential.
Well, I think how policy influence happens and where it happens is changing. And I don't think our kind of traditional institutions are really recognizing or appreciating that, right? So you see more think tanks kind of maybe with an audio component, which I think is important. But what I see from my students, right? I teach an undergraduate class, one undergraduate class, and one graduate class, and that's everything, I'm basing some of my reflections on. They're extremely likely to mention in class, not ironically, right? Something that came up for them on TikTok, something they were watching on YouTube, a parasocial relationship they have with someone who they will cite, right? They will name drop the person or say, yeah, so and so was talking about that. So I think you're smart to be making videos and sort of getting there. But I also think you and I could just talk about maybe it's our age, right? Like why we missed that wave and that turn and what it means to ignore that site of learning, right? That site of trust. Because it's very much a site where the places where people are kind of building comfort and knowledge, right? It's not just silly dances. I know people know that, but I actually don't think they really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm 41,
Mhm.
41 in 1 month. And I
Congrats.
remember, thank you. And I remember first hearing about TikTok, whatever it was, 8 years ago, something like that. And the person was saying,
How?
"Oh, like my kid."
Like, what do you
Well,
remember?
it was a colleague of mine, another writer, who was saying, "Well, my kid is on TikTok now,
Hmm.
and she's into these coordinated dances." So you mentioned dances, and this is very specifically the first time I'd heard of TikTok. This kid was on TikTok doing dances, and I think you're right. And for a lot of people, that's what they think of. And there's some of that. And I got TikTok so I could clip from the show and say, this is an interesting little clip. Come back, watch the rest of the
Mhm.
interview. But so I have a TikTok feed. I don't really use it much, but I do a little bit. And the algorithm for me is all dogs and recipes, which I'm perfectly fine with. But there's serious political content on TikTok as well,
Yeah.
which is shaping perception, shaping preferences, evaluation, so on and so forth in real time, that I think you're right. People don't fully understand. Do you think that is going to then influence elections or influence public policy outcomes?
I think it could. I think it probably is. I mean, we've seen so much coverage of the manosphere, or the podcasters and the audio and visual influencers who helped President Trump win office. And yet I don't think I haven't seen, anything comprehensive in Canadian media that looks at who are the Canadian creators who are trusted thought leaders in the political realm, right? I'm interested in this. I've looked
Mhm.
for it because I want to kind of follow and listen and learn and kind of expose myself. I'm always trying to pay attention to like what I have an aversion to, topic wise and otherwise,
Mhm.
because I think it's usually a clue that I need to spend more time there. It feels like a blind spot. It feels like much more of a blind spot here. The conversation we seem to have in Canada is more about like cybersecurity and influence, right? That kind of undue influence. And I think capital I political influencers are in that spectrum too, in a way, right? In terms of potentially skewing people's perspectives, perhaps intentionally. And I shouldn't say I haven't seen any coverage. I have seen uh, the logic look at
Mhm.
people that might have been funded, by a particular source that I believe was Russian. But anyway, I'm being a little bit vague because I don't remember it exactly. Sorry. Do you?
And nobody wants to get sued. Yeah,
Yeah,
I do. And I think it's worth noting that there are, you know, malicious influencers who are doing effectively propaganda, potentially, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah,
And then genuine people who are trying to make sense of the news in the public policy of the day, and
totally,
the current
totally.
event. Like, there's this whole thing, but it's
Well, that's just
pluralized.
direct translation, I would say. There's like a category of translation where people are sort of bringing the news to life,
Yeah.
but it's probably or not typically it seems to not be their original reporting. And then there's it's almost like op-ed, like
Hmm.
constant video op-eds of a particular perspective. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I've done some of those, and they've done okay. I mean, I'm still
Cool.
figuring out the algorithm, and what people are going to
But do you
watch and
feel
what they're
like
not
you
going to
have to
watch.
contort to the algorithm too? That's the other thing. Like, what is that feeling like? Are you like, I've got to make every video 9 minutes, or I should really say these keywords? Like, how do you balance making what you really want to make and what you think you should make? Like,
Well, I researched this a little bit when I was getting into this,
mm-hmm,
and got advice from people about length and frequency and all that.
mm-hmm.
And I took that sort of seriously, and then I just started doing whatever I
Started
felt
doing
like
stuff?
doing. I was like, I don't care. And the fact is, I want to reach people, but I don't need to reach people. I don't live or die by a TikTok view count or even a YouTube
Yeah.
view count. Although I want people to watch this stuff, I want the people to
Mm-hmm.
subscribe. That's great, but not because my paycheck depends on it. If I don't go viral on TikTok or get 10,000 views on YouTube, it doesn't change whether or not I can make my mortgage at
Yeah.
the end of the month, right? So my focus has been on putting out stuff that I think is good. And if the numbers follow, that's great. And I'll do little things like hashtags. Like, I'm not an
That's
idiot. I
cute.
can I
Yeah.
can do a hashtag. You're supposed to do a
I do a
hashtag.
hashtag
You're
too.
supposed to do a hashtag.
I'll do
It's
a
not
hashtag
Twitter.
on LinkedIn too.
Yeah.
Totally do a hashtag on LinkedIn.
Yeah. But I'm not trying to, do a kind of deep reading of the mysteries of the algorithm. I don't care that
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
much.
I mean, I read about that, so I'm interested. That's why I asked you. But back to audio for 1 second. You mentioned very kindly the big fix, and
Hmm.
you did review it. There's a gentleman, he's a former Toronto comedian. He goes by the name of the Goose Online. He made a 45-minute video based on the book and kind of interviews with us. And it's been viewed almost 100,000 times, which, like, I feel like in Canada, Canadian YouTube scale is incredible. But I felt for me, as somebody who wants to be a credible thinker and somebody who's productive in that space, I was kind of very amazed and impressed because I don't have those skills. I hadn't thought to do something like that. And I believe I need to become capable of that sort of art, right? Because more people were exposed than through writing something. Like, writing seems like a smaller and smaller part of thinking, I think is what I'm telling you.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's part of the reason I've started doing this is because you need to meet people where they're at, and not in a kind
Yeah.
of condescending or sneering way, but look,
No, no, no.
this is how people want to consume their stuff, and that's how
Yeah.
they live their life. And I respect that. Look, I mean, 100 years ago, it was radio, and then it was
Mhm.
television, and then it was the internet. and newspapers, obviously in between, and magazines. Then it was the internet and social media, microblogging and blogging, and now
Yep.
it's this. And okay, it's a different medium, and people want to say, well, it's the destruction of the mind and the attention span, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Go back and look at newspapers in the 20s or 30s. People complain that radio is going to destroy minds, right? People complain that you go look at newspapers that quite literally
Mm.
were part and parcel of starting a war. Go look at the Spanish-American War and the role that newspapers played in starting that war to sell the news.
No,
Like,
that's why we have you. I'm not doing that.
no, but yeah,
But I
I
know,
mean
I'm
in the
just saying.
general
Yeah.
sense, in the abstract
No,
sense
no,
of,
no, I
um,
know.
but you know what I mean is that we always want to demonize the new medium as the end of civilization as we know it, and we're like, no, people are just trying to get through the day.
But don't you feel a little bit concerned about some of the data and analysis on how like people aren't reading anymore? Fewer books being
Yeah.
assigned in post-secondary, fewer books read per year, that kind of subset of literacy that seems US based on sounding out words, that's how people kind of learn. It has a particular name. For some reason I've been watching videos on that. I don't know, there's a tint that's like background simmering in my mind in terms
Hmm.
of some of my nervousness, right? I think audio is not just a complement to people's knowledge diets. I think sometimes it has replaced other forms too. Anyway,
Oh, for sure. I
what
mean, the
do I know?
harbinger for me. No, no, you know the stuff better than I do. But the harbinger for me was this talk about, well, Netflix wants shows and movies to describe what's
That we
going
can half
on.
watch, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
people can be and I'm as guilty as the next person. I'm putting together Lego or answering emails and watching the show, and like,
I
well,
do
you got to
email as well. I
describe what's
watch TV
happening.
too sometimes. Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. My point isn't that these things aren't potentially risky or there aren't trade-offs. That there's just nothing inherently nefarious about them. They can be
Fair.
used for
Yes.
good. It's like Foucault
Yes.
used to say, it's not that it's good or bad, it's that it's potentially dangerous. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
true of these technologies. And that, but you could also say there's promise here. Wherever there's a transformation, there's a promise. Book
Mm-hmm.
talk, for instance, is also driving a lot of book sales.
Right.
A lot of people go like, I'm going to read this book that's hot on this romantasy book that's hot on book talk, and I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of promise and hope there. But the flip side is there's a lot of grifters, and there's a lot of interference, people who want to radicalize people, and we've got to wrap our heads around that at the same time, and that's the thing we've got to figure out. And I want to use that as a pivot, because with the rise of all this new technologies and new distributions of power, we also see a rise of the troligarchy, the
Mm.
broligarchy, or the bro oligarchy, whatever the hell we're calling it, and the radicalization of certain segments of the population. And it used to be that if you had a really loony idea, you were a real fringe wacko, you
You
had to
wrote
kind
a
of
chain letter.
you wrote a chain letter, you became the
Come
John
on.
Birch Society, or you went and you stood on the street corner with your flyer and you shouted at people who just were trying to cross the road to get away from you.
Mm.
Now you go to 4chan or to Reddit or to YouTube or wherever, and there's a sub community you can be a part of, and you can scale that up on social media, whether it's Twitter or whatever it might be, and network and mobilize, and you can win an American election off of, in part, that. And I wonder if you think in Canada we've wrapped our head around the risk of these communities for generating a kind of toxic discourse and outcomes, and even stripping away the veneer, at least, off our democracy, because it's not our democracy is not as strong as people think, and I worry that this stuff scaled up over time, that's the ball game.
I mean, look, I don't think we're paying enough attention to Reddit. I think Reddit too often is viewed as something that's noisy or private, right? Reddit has increasingly become the site that people both help each other out, but share reflections and collaborate. And as you said, find each other. And you mentioned veneer. I mean, I think the veneer of anonymity and as on on that social site compared to other sites that even again are less dependent on photos or other kind of revealing elements is attractive to people and kind of insulates them and maybe protects them. Maybe they speak more freely or are more kind of colorful there. I think as policy people, the hardest job that we have is listening, right? Paying attention. You mentioned meeting people where they are, yes, but genuinely listening, right? Being able to look at something that's semi-viral on Reddit and quickly back that up into a regulatory context and see, oh wait, that's provincial labor law, or we could do something about that, or this is the gap, right? And then move to fix it. I think that's what people kind of expect from a responsive state, but we don't do it. And you mentioned troligarchy. I mean, I think it's very on vogue right now to hate the government, right? To not see its value in our everyday lives, to really lean into its shortcomings, its inefficiencies, elements that are bloated. And one of the, I think, more concerning elements about us as Canadian thinkers is we tend to be unoriginal, right?
Hmm.
We're vulnerable to what's happening in other places, especially the US, because we're quick to want to grab onto and emulate it. And this micro movement around a Department of Government Efficiency for Canada, we should similarly quickly, I see the seduction, right?
Hmm.
I also I love cleaning. In another
Sure.
world, I'm a cleanfluencer. Spring is upon us soon, right? Like the idea that you can very quickly edit and update and tidy up government and make it work better sounds really compelling in certain instances, but it does the state a disservice, right? So hopefully going forward we can find ways to make government work more effectively, but not in a way that pits entrepreneurs against public servants, right? They actually have so much more in common than people give them credit for. And it's been sad for me to log on sometimes, right? Like I'm sad to see the chorus of get out of the way Canada under the guise of building up the country through what is fundamentally an agenda of deregulation based on what I can read.
How much of it do you think is people don't see the good that government does because it's missed, right? This is the old bit of you don't get credit for the things that go right. Right,
No.
you don't get credit for preventing a crisis because the crisis never happens. So sort of imagine
Yeah.
like if there's a stockpile of vaccines, like that's great, or a stockpile of
Mm,
PPE, that's great, but you've got to pay for it during all those years when nothing happens, and then you get criticized for being inefficient. You don't get the win unless
mm,
some crisis happens. But so then you're at risk in point one, and then in point two, if the crisis never happens because you've prevented it, you don't get credit for preventing it because it didn't happen, and then you get criticized for wasting and being over prepared for it, right? You just like you can't win. And years of demonizing the state, of demonizing public servants, of demonizing programs, have hollowed out our capacity to do things together. And then people start to say, well, my god, government looks kind of useless
mm.
because
Right, we're
there's been a
outsourcing
push
so
to make
much
it look.
more. We view that as a
Yeah,
failure. It's rarely painted as a
yeah.
strength. I worry that it's not always a strength, right? But, maybe that kind of more on-demand model now and then for particular expertise is good. I mean,
Oh, let's
of
talk
the
about that. You're talking about consulting, the
yeah,
consultants,
yeah,
because there's a lot of heat around that, and the government has been criticized for we're pushing too much to consultants, and it's costing us a fortune compared to
yeah.
building it up in the public service. But this is where I think people want to have it both ways. They don't want a big public service who can do all this work, but they also don't want the government to pay consultants.
Yeah. No, I know. And then, is that money in the future in Canada just going to shift from the Deloittes of the world to tech companies? I'm not sure. I don't see people putting their hand up and sort of being like, civic technologists, what are your hopes and dreams? What are your blockers? How can we help you? How can we do tours of duty, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? What can we rapidly prototype for you? What digital public infrastructure can we build up in Canada? That's exciting to think about and sort of
Mhm.
bring forward. But again, I think that element isn't there. Of the OECD countries, Canada is one of the most we're the most reliant or among the most reliant on income taxes to fund our state, right? And that's kind of unique. We never really shifted more towards consumptive taxes and other elements. So I read a lot of this as backlash against the proposal to increase capital gains, which most economists agreed was, an efficient and good decision, and really caused an uproar and annoyance, probably a mix of the policy ask itself and the fact that it maybe wasn't previewed, wasn't socialized. It seemed to feel to people that it came out of left field. Um, but if people were so angry about the prospect of paying a little bit more in tax for money that I would say, it's bad for me to say that it's free money, right? But money that you may not have mm, directly done as much to do to earn in the way that
Mhm.
people are. That's like actually a terrible
You're
definition, but
no, you're being
I'm saying,
very, I'm going to call it parasitic, but you're being very diplomatic. I
am I? Okay, I just mean even say on property, right?
yeah.
Even say on property, say you've had a piece of property that's accrued a particular amount of value over time. The fact that people were losing their minds over, a cottage sale and that marginal extra amount that they would pay, it's like I really felt like one, you don't actively do as much to earn that differential, and
You don't do anything.
two, that value question that you mentioned, the value kind of where that goes, we've lost it. We've lost it. I said one thing one time on social about how much I pay in daycare, and which I thought was like interesting for me because it's something that's like socioeconomic, and I was showing appreciation, and it was just that I budgeted to pay 3 times as much for daycare, and people are very angry about this. People wrote to me at the university. I'm a bad mother because I don't care for my son full
Oh my
time.
God. Yeah. Some people shouldn't be
Um,
allowed to use the internet though. This is
if I
the,
can't afford to work, if I can't afford to stay home with him, then I, shouldn't be working. They didn't have childcare. Why should I have it? All this stuff. And I'm also like,
yeah.
I do pay for this over the course of my life. Like we all do. And my son's going to pay for people's CPP and you know what I mean? But all of that collectiveness and kind of the time scale of these systems has been totally lost. It's all sticker price, right? Well, how much for that? How much for this?
Yeah.
Um,
There's no
benefits to
solidarity.
me, yeah, solidarity, benefits to me of working and being happy and enjoying the stuff that I do. Yeah, that's way more value than what I pay in childcare.
Like there's a
Anyway,
whole generation of people who can't afford a house. They can't afford their rent. They certainly can't afford a mortgage, and they're going to be paying for a boomer's retirement. The same
trying
boomer
to.
who says, or
And
trying, the same boomer who says, "Why don't you eat less avocado toast, and then you can have a house?" Right? Like,
well, who's going to
and
buy their houses? That's the thing. Everyone talks about the intergenerational wealth transfer that's
yeah,
coming, right? And that's a
yeah,
hot
it's
topic, and
big,
that's
right?
an important topic. It's huge,
Yeah,
right? Um, but I feel like it only goes so far. If you have a big intergenerational wealth transfer, and that capital is primarily used to continue to stimulate an overheated housing market, then what is being passed on? Like, can people pay those houses off? Are you passing on debt to the next generation? Home debt? Again, retirement, is that a deferral? The crisis in retirement in Canada in the future, right? People working potentially in perpetuity.
hmm
And then we can't find it in ourselves to raise the retirement age to 67. Like, I don't know. There are interesting incongruencies sometimes that I think are really going to mm, blow up and become more complex. I didn't know we were going to go there. I didn't see it coming and it just came out of my mouth. Sorry.
we just we just go where we
Stressing.
get. It's jazz.
We're
It's just
stressing.
jazz. You just play the right note in the moment, and it never ends. It's jazz.
Okay.
Uh, I say that as a jazz fan, so I'm allowed to. Anyways, what did you make of was it Sergey Brin who said 60 hours is the productivity sweet spot? Was it him? Some
I
Google
mean,
guy. I loved this because I want to go back to Karl Marx here for a second because all the kids are talking about Karl Marx these days.
for sure.
And
Definitely.
this is one of my little obsessions because I've written about this a few times and I pay fairly close attention to this. Was Marx talked about how automation wasn't inherently a bad thing. Automation actually had the
Right.
potential to free workers because the more you automate labor, the less you're doing the labor, and that's great. They're like these economic transformations that are driven by productivity through automation, through technological development, aren't inherently bad. They're only bad when the capitalists own the robots and use them to suppress labor power and labor value and to put you out of work with nothing else to do, and you don't get your leisure time, you get to go broke.
Yeah. Yay.
And so, yay, it's great. It's the world's greatest Ponzi scheme and or pyramid scheme. But then let's catch up, and we're here today in the on Al Gore's internet in the 21st century,
Hmm.
And this guy, this tech bro, was talking about a 60-hour work week in the face of unprecedented automation. And I think people are quite rightly saying, like, excuse me, this was supposed to give me more time to sit around and play video games or read books or go fishing with my niece or nephew or whatever. And now you're talking, I got to be at the office 60 hours a week. Oh, and it has to be the office, by the way, because it's immoral to work from home where you might get proper sleep.
Because we have
So
to, yeah, we have to
uh,
perform.
yeah, what do you make of this? I mean, how do we, like, is this like tech feudalism where the tech guys are like, we need all these worker bees 60 hours a week to produce digital widgets? Like, what's going on with this?
I mean, it probably speaks to a lack of trust, right? We still want people to be performing work. We want to
Mhm.
see them. You see that with return to office mandates, and it's hard to have wiggle room in between. And then volume, right? That more is more. It's not
Mhm.
the quality of that work. Different chunks of my day and your day are probably of varying value to you, right? When I sit on meetings for a bulk of a day or I'm on and off Zoom, it never feels like a good work day because I didn't actually get work done. I got chatting with people done and worked through things, but I prefer longer stretches of deep work where I'm really kind of powering through things and getting things done. I also think that male perspective sometimes is still challenging in terms of work, right? Who benefited the most from work from home? Or I mentioned my toddler. It does benefit our entire household for me to sometimes be working at home and be able to click off my intellectual work and make sure dinner's ready and tidy up and just help with that transition. But I'm very privileged and I'm able to come back to my work later in the day if and as needed versus like I'm not a service worker or, somewhere that I have to be physically at particular times. But again, numbers, I think it's presented to push people and you're kind of constantly recalibrating your quote unquote loyalty, right? And kissing that ring. Yeah, I love that amount of time. Here are my hacks. Like, here's what I do.
Yeah.
Here's what time I wake up. And it's like, great, you're probably earning enough that you can outsource other parts of your life. You're very heavily reliant on others, both services and people. And all of those elements are invisible to what we're going to elevate and call your productivity or your, devotion to whatever it is you're doing or get to do or like to do or have to do.
Yeah, it's a scam. It's a scam.
Yeah.
It's a total scam. And I saw this tweet the other day of name something. This goes around every so often, right? It's like name some scam that's been normalized, like the 5 hour or the five
Oh
day work
yeah. I
week,
saw
and
you. I
and
saw
and
you
and
write
that
that.
that's not everyone. For some people, I get. I Here's the thing: if the world moved to a 4 day work week, I would still probably work 5 days. But here's the leap in human consciousness and empathy that's important. I still think other people should be allowed to work 4 days a week. I'm never going to be able to work 4 days a week. I'm never going to retire. That's for all kinds of reasons.
No, but you can work 4 days a week and cr- cram in. Now I'm being terrible, but like you could probably take the equivalent of the 40-ish hours, right? If you look at a traditional 40-hour work week with like an hour every day for lunch and just
Mhm.
collapse that lunchtime, that's 5 hours. Maybe distribute 35 hours across 4 days instead. It's doable, right?
My problem is
In terms
as
of
a
giving yourself the kind of summer Fridays or the time
yeah.
off.
Well,
Yeah,
maybe I'll
but
do summer Fridays. That sounds nice.
you should
Like
do summer Friday. I
patio
saw you
patio
tweeting or
Fridays
posting
and
about like working on a Sunday night.
yeah, I was working last night. We're recording this on a Monday. I was working last night sending emails, and my dog was quite literally pressed so close against me, her face in my face, that I couldn't type. And it was because I had to send these emails. And it's just like when you're a freelancer and you're self employed, you've got to, you can't say no, and you never say no, and you never stop. And you're just sort of always trying to scale
Yeah.
up because when you're writing for someone else, and this is a little insider look at how the business works, you never get a raise in this business. You always get a pay cut because the fixed rates at magazines and
Mm,
newspapers, they are fixed.
yeah.
And every year you make a little bit less because of inflation. And the only things that actually grow are things like Substack, because you can
Mhm.
add new subscribers, or YouTube, where you can monetize more and more as you grow. And that's probably part of the reason why I'm here. I'm here because I love all of you, obviously, but also because this is what you
Intellectual
can
property
actually
scaling.
grow.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I mean, I don't want to whinge about my job, because in many ways it's brilliant and privileged. And if I want to wake up at 9 and start working at 10, I can do that. But there are trade-offs. But it speaks to our need to develop a little bit of empathy and solidarity across lines. And to speak to something you mentioned earlier,
Mm.
you get an email that says, "Why the hell should Vass have childcare? I never had childcare." I'm like, well, then you know what? Good for her. Too bad for you. You also paid $1 for your house in 1986. Congratulations. Why does everyone want to either pull the ladder up behind them, or say, well, I didn't get a ladder, so you can't have one?
Oh, I mean, I also think sometimes, especially for women who are thinking out loud and in the open, which can be scary, there can be a knee jerk, just, you kind of want to silence them. I don't receive rape and death threats. It's never been that kind of scale. But if and when I publish in the Globe, if and when I'm on CBC or elsewhere, I will get notes. My dean will get notes. My president of the university has gotten notes. Why is she allowed? Like, she said this, she shouldn't. I think my editor has, gotten notes. So I guess I bring it up just to, it's always interesting to hear from people. That's the thing. Like, I have bad impulses.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is like, if you comment on something I've written, you have like a very high percentage that I will engage with you.
Mm-hmm.
And my co-author Denise always like, Vass, don't let on that you even read the comments. Like, don't read the comments. And I'm like, the comments are fascinating. Like,
Like
this is so
like
interesting.
anthropologically,
Pardon?
for me it's a compulsion. For you, is it like an anthropological fascination?
That would make it sound fancier. No, it's partially compulsion. It's like, I want to understand what this, provoked for you. You signed into your account so that you could post this comment, for better or for worse, right? Sometimes it's flattering and I'm like, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Other times, someone didn't read something, or they're just, people want to share their own experiences. And that's where I do start to learn. I'm like, oh, I hadn't considered this, or I didn't know that this jurisdiction did that or something. So I guess we started by talking about kind of power and influence and where people are projecting, but maybe some of the real magic is in those feedback loops, right? Where people are willing to respond or email you back from your Substack and like tell you something cool. You must get that.
Oh yeah,
People write you
I get
back after
some.
you publish.
Oh, all the time. Yeah, and now have for the better part of 20 years. And sometimes it's, "Oh, I like this.
Hmm.
Thanks for saying this." Sometimes it's, "I'm going to kill you," or some equivalent of
Mm.
that. And sometimes it's, I got one recently after an interview where someone said, "This was kind of a softball moment. You missed something." And it was a
Mm.
critique. And I was like, you know what? You're right. And so you
That's
get
that's a
the whole
public
range.
service. That's
It's a
cool.
it's yeah, and I take that in good faith. But I sometimes wonder if we should have a world, like if I were to design the internet and humankind as a species and technology, if I was in control of everything, like like Minecraft on God mode, I would say, you're allowed to say mean things on the internet, but there's a 1 in 5 chance you're going to get shocked in a way that's actually really painful.
Okay.
Do you do you want to proceed?
You know what should happen? Your desk chair. It should be like a dunk tank. And all of a sudden, your desk chair should shoot out from behind your butt and you should fall into water.
Or you get slimed. Like, remember that television show? We were about the same vintage, give or take a field goal, I think. Remember
Yeah.
that television show YTV? Like, you can't say that on television. You get slimed. You
Yeah.
get slimed,
Yeah. You get
and only
slimed.
because there's no. But my substantive point is, there's no friction, because to speak to what you had said, you log on and do this. You just click a button, right? There's no friction between the thing you read and your nasty response. There's none, and there's no consequence for it, for the most part, for most people,
Right.
and that's a
But
problem.
but directionally paying attention to the that very same impulse, right? To be nasty or to be cruel, I think is an important indicator for policy people. And the data shows that people are angrier and more tense than ever before. And I think in the tariff war, we're already trying to get through a cost of living crisis that does not seem to be abating. I think going to see more kind of just, bad driving and meanness.
Hmm.
So maybe we should take it as a symptom of something bigger than just people's personality failures. Or that's the happy story I tell myself, to be like, when someone cuts me off, if I'm driving, I'm like, they must have diarrhea. Like, just take the spot, try to get
Hmm.
home, get to the washroom. Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the old quotation attributed to Plato: "Is be kind, for everybody's fighting a hard battle." Like that's the.
Yeah.
I like your
Of
approach.
diarrhea. The Vass
Of other
Bednar
things,
amendment.
like, but literal and metaphorical, more metaphoric,
Mm
literal and figurative. Everyone's dealing with some figurative diarrhea at least.
hmm.
There's
Right?
the quote. There's the clip for TikTok. You've got to go though. You've got a busy day and
I
a
gotta go.
life,
I'm
and
sorry. I don't
and I
want to,
no
but
no don't
yeah.
don't be sorry. It was a pleasure having just this time talking with you. It's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I do want to shout you out because you're one of, few people who I love to crank call, and I will call you at random just to talk for like 11 minutes while I Swiffer, because
Sometimes I
I
pick up.
urgently need to sense make something, and more often than not you pick up, which I think
Yeah.
is awesome. Yeah, thanks for those.
Oh, my pleasure. It's terrifying because I'm a millennial and the phone rings. I'm like, oh my God, who died?
Is Vass okay? Other friends have been like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "But you wouldn't even be the person I called if I wasn't okay."
Yeah, that's right.
Like, I'm like, "Yeah, David, help. David, you're in Ottawa. Like, I'm in Toronto. I need you now."
Yeah.
Um, anyway,
I'm
great to
trying to get
chat.
home and I need to go to the bathroom.
Help, I've
Uh,
got diarrhea. Okay,
what a
I'll see you
great note on
online.
which to. Well,
Keep
thank you
up the
so much
great
for
work.
joining. Oh, you're very nice. Thank you so much for joining. And to everyone listening, thank you for listening through this masterpiece. I appreciate it. And we'll see you back here for the next episode.